everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is May 23rd, 2024. I'm Barry Stagner. Very glad, as always, to have you joining us this evening. And a couple of things, really, one with two components to it that I want to start our program with, and that is to ask you for prayer. One, a gentleman named Steve Yohn, Pastor Steve, is the co-author of the fiction books that Amir has written, and he has had a major heart surgery, and it was scheduled and planned, but it was a high-risk thing. He has come out and is doing well, but it's like a 6-week recovery. So I want you to pray for Pastor Steve Yohn. You might recognize that last name from the Revealing Revelation and Discovering Daniel books. Dr. Rick Yohn, that's Steve's dad, a pair of gifted writers, obviously. But pray for Steve that his recovery would be smooth and quick. And then one other request is for a young woman in our church. She's just an awesome and godly young woman, 18 years old, has her whole life basically had a very severe nut allergy. And she now has it's called mast cell acute syndrome and or activation syndrome. Mast cells are the ones that trigger allergic reactions. She's gone into anaphylactic shock multiple times. Obviously, she's had her life saved by her own mom by the use of an EpiPen, and she is in a really tough state. She was in the hospital for over a week, and now they've released her, basically saying, well, there's nothing more we can do. And now the insurance company has refused, because she's at home, to give her the weekly infusions that she needs. And again, big pharma on the move, nothing but greedy, and really don't care about anybody's health and all these things that we have all come to know. But her name is Elena, and I'd ask that you would pray for Elena and pray for Steve for their recovery as two godly people. Pastor Steve's a dear friend and brother, and Elena, we've known her. Yeah, actually, her dad I've known since he was a teenager, and he's now the youth pastor at our church. And I was blessed to marry he and his wife, Sarah, and he's on staff at our church now, and their little gal is really fighting and has severe pain and all kinds of things. She goes into kind of almost a comatose state where she can't talk, and the reactions to this have been very severe. This cell mast issue, and so I would just appreciate your prayers. I know you're an awesome group of prayer warriors and walking in the Spirit and all that. So I would covet your prayers on their behalf. Well, let's get going. It's been a big week, and obviously we all know about the death of Abraham Raisi, as well as the foreign minister of Iran. And Fox News reports that some Iranians celebrate the Butcher of Tehran. That's who Ibrahim Raisi is and was. And his death is celebrated in the streets despite the oppressive regime. And fireworks were launched in the night. A woman was passing out sweets on camera. Several people heard cheering in a video posted online by opponents of the regime after Raisi died Sunday in a helicopter crash. Before his death was even announced as officially the end result of the helicopter crash, I think most of us saw the initial articles were that his chopper had experienced a hard landing, and there were fireworks already being fired off in Iran over those who were hopeful for his death, and he and the foreign minister. And then, interestingly, there were those who were in the rescue effort that also lost their lives. It was in a very precarious area where the chopper went down. But the Butcher of Tehran is now has met the end of his days. And, this is a tough thing. It's one of those things where we realize somebody that is just absolutely desperately wicked and hateful, has killed over 4,000 of their own people, has now met their end. We know that the Lord does not take pleasure in the death of the wicked. And yet we're told in the Proverbs that, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan. And people have been groaning under the authoritarian role of the Ayatollah, as well as the Butcher of Tehran. And hopefully this will lead to freedom for the Iranian people. And again, as I mentioned in time past, we need to remember that when you speak of Iran, you're not talking about the people, you're talking about the regime, at least in a negative sense, and their hatred of Israel. The Iranian people, the ones that I know and have met, love the nation of Israel and want this to come to an end. And it's just this extreme Islam that has brought about the conditions there. And, if you ever have the opportunity to go to YouTube, you can watch a video of the pre 1979 takeover of Iran they're becoming the Islamic State of Iran, and just watching the videos that look like video footage from the streets of LA, and now all of a sudden it's burqas and hijabs and covered hair and modesty police and all these other heinous things that have been brought about by this regime. The article says this underscores the profound detestation and revulsion that the Iranian people felt toward Raisi, a man whose legacy is inextricably linked with the darkest chapters of Iran's recent history. The article said on the National Council of the Resistance of Iran. Human rights activists and critics of the Iranian theocracy say Raisi was a murderer and an authoritarian who led a crackdown on the 2022-23 demonstrations provoked by the death in custody of a young Iranian Kurdish woman arrested by the morality police for violating the country's strict dress code. And if you know anything about the story, she was showing her hair. It was out from underneath her hijab, and she was arrested and beat to death in police custody. His direct role in a 1988 massacre, which saw the execution of 30,000 political prisoners, remains a deeply painful memory for the countless families, said Safavi. For these families, particularly for the mothers who lost their children, the death of Raisi represents a moment of long-awaited justice, albeit complete. And I'm sorry, but this Ali Safavi is the National Council of Resistance of Iran Foreign Affairs Committee chairman. And that's who was being quoted there. Although many remember Raisi for his brutality, thousands of mourners were seen in Iran on Tuesday for state-sponsored funeral ceremonies. Prosecutors warned people against showing any public signs of celebrating Raisi's death, and a heavy security presence has been seen on the streets of Tehran since the crash, according to the Associated Press. Well, yeah, there were mourners there. They were threatened to be there, and that's the only reason that any of them were there. And again, just a vile, vile human being. And, there's some other things I think we need to make mention regarding what's going on and what happened there and the response of the Iranian people. And, there's an interesting development that's going to take place during the tribulation, where, as we mentioned in recent programs, the Lord is going to switch from defending Israel to going on the offensive, and he is going to destroy Israel's enemies. And Zechariah chapter 12 makes that chapter 14, makes that very, very clear that God is going to fight as he fights in the day of battle, and he is going to destroy those who would come up against Israel. And Raisi was definitely in that camp, and I don't know that God was involved in this or not. I don't want to go as far to say that the Lord slapped that helicopter out of the sky, but someday he's going to be doing exactly that in defense of the nation of Israel. He's going to fight with weaponry that humankind cannot develop or create. He's going to fight with hailstones of fire, 200-pound hailstones, and the other things we see in the book of Revelation. Now, Politico reports that Ireland and other European countries are going to recognize Palestinian statehood, and Ireland will officially recognize Palestine as a state in a move expected to be coordinated with at least two other European governments, those being Norway and Spain. The move was announced at an 8 a.m. press conference Wednesday, led by the leaders of Ireland's three-party government, Prime Minister Simon Harris, Foreign Minister Michelle Martin, and Environmental Minister Eamon Ryan. And the Irish official who spoke to Politico on the condition he wasn't going to be identified wasn't officially revealed in advance. The purpose of the conference wasn't revealed in advance. Said that Ireland planned to coordinate its announcement in tandem with similar moves in two other European capitals Wednesday. The official declined to identify either of them. And of course, we now know that was Norway and Spain. Now, anticipating Dublin's move, the Israeli Foreign Ministry issued a video criticizing Ireland for allegedly playing into the hands of Hamas. The fact that Hamas leaders are thanking you should serve as a wake up call. The Israeli government video chides in the message pointed at Ireland. Until now, Sweden has been the only EU member to have unilaterally recognized Palestine as a state. Several other European countries adopted the position before they joined the EU, and while none of the G7 nations recognized Palestine, more than 140 of the 197 members of the United Nothing do. And obviously, this is pointing our minds to Zechariah 12:3, where Jerusalem is going to become a burdensome stone to all peoples. And, the question often comes up, should we be supporting Israel in their efforts to defend themselves and eliminate Hamas? And the question is easily answered with an absolutely yes, we should. Modern Israel is biblical Israel, contrary to what many would like us to believe today. They're back in the national homeland, speaking the ancient language of Hebrew. DNA has revealed what many of them come from, and they are the same people with the same names of ancient Hebrews, and speaking that same language in the same geographic area. And Bible prophecy, most importantly, is being fulfilled right before our eyes. Everything the Bible said would happen in the last days when Israel is coming back into existence, being scattered amongst the nations of the world for nearly 2,000 years. God said he was going to bring them back. All the way back in Deuteronomy, the Lord made this prophecy, and now we have seen it fulfilled. So, to say that modern Israel isn't biblical Israel is just ridiculous. It's an unbiblical, as a matter of fact, it's an anti-biblical position. And watching all these things happen and things like this just remind us of what's coming with these nations siding against Israel, and I think the point is well taken. What the Israeli spokesman said, the fact that Hamas is celebrating your decision ought to tell you something. And there's been a series of videos that have been out of late and other stories. I'm sure many of you have seen and heard of some of the women that were captured and the horrific treatment they received and the rape and murder. And a father and son team, I just read an article this morning, a father and son team bragging about the murder, the rape and murder, and how many they killed and all these things on October 7th. And it's just a heinous thing. And, there's just no getting around it. This is demonic in nature. And that opens the door for me to mention something else. One thing I think we need to remember is that during the tribulation period, Revelation chapter 13 makes it very clear that the earth dwellers will worship Satan. It says that exactly. And the whole world will worship Satan and the first beast. They'll worship the dragon, is the term used there. Well, the dragon obviously is Satan. And again, I think we need to keep in mind that these things have to develop before the tribulation. There has to be this anti-God mentality, this anti-church, anti-Jew mentality that will cause the earth dwellers during the tribulation to be complicit in the death of millions of people, and those who refuse the mark to be slain brutally, beheaded is what Revelation says. And that word beheaded means to chop off with an axe. There has to be a brutality in mind that is specific to what's going to happen during the tribulation period, and unprecedented, I think, in world history. Yes, there's always been brutal murderers. Yes, there have been many who have slain hundreds of thousands and even millions of people. But all of this will pale in comparison to what the Antichrist is going to do, because he is empowered by Satan himself. And therefore, we would expect to see this type of demonic activity prior to the rapture of the church and the onset of the tribulation. Now, in order for this type of thinking to develop before the tribulation begins, there would have to be a huge gap of time in between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation, and I just don't see that. as happening, because the Antichrist is going to be quick to rise to power. He's going to rise from obscurity. And no, I don't know who he is, and I don't have any candidates in mind. But what I do know is he's going to do what Antiochus Epiphanes did all the way back in the 2nd century BC, where he rose to power as a madman. He defiled the most holy place and slaughtered a pig on the altar and the other things we've heard about him. And this one who is coming, the lawless one, the son of perdition, the man of sin, he is going to commit an abomination of desolation, where he sits in the most holy place of the third temple that he himself, I believe, is going to cause the world to allow to be rebuilt on the Temple Mount. And I believe the motivation for this will be the end of the Ezekiel war, where God wipes out radical Islam quite handily. And it takes 7 months to bury the dead who invaded Israel from the north with a hook in their jaw, as Ezekiel 38 and 39 says. So, this type of mentality would be expected prior to the tribulation. And so we're seeing it happen. And it's sad that many within the church are just so blind to what the reality is and what the Bible teaches. And this is the end result of not teaching Bible prophecy, and those who shy away from it, or those who allegorize the book of Revelation or any other prophetic book, book of Daniel being included. And, now we're reaping what we've sown to the wind. And now we're reaping a whirlwind of heinous behavior and beliefs from all over the world. And again, sadly, this type of thinking has infiltrated the church. Now, I know because you're watching, you don't think that way. You understand that we're watching things unfold that the Bible said would happen regarding the nation of Israel and their place in God's prophetic timeline and history. The Times of Israel says that Blinken acknowledges Israel may reject Saudi deal if the pathway to Palestinian state is required. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken acknowledged for the first time on Tuesday that Israel might not be willing to embrace a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia if it means agreeing to a clear progress toward a Palestinian state. The Saudis demand a ceasefire in Gaza and a pathway to a Palestinian state, and it may well be that Israel isn't able or willing to proceed down this pathway, Blinken said in testimony before Congress. It must decide if it wants to take advantage of this opportunity to achieve something sought from its founding, he added. Well, you know what? The Palestinians have been offered statehood. They've been offered more than even what they asked for as far as geography goes. And yet, as the saying goes, and rightfully so, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Why? Because their mantra in their hearts and minds is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In other words, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, that's what they see as a Palestinian state. There is no Israel in the minds of the Palestinians in the future. So again, considering this and the fact that people are standing beside that in just huge and blatant ignorance it's appalling. And Blinken faced criticism from the right and the left during the session, with Republicans accusing the administration of failing Israel and Democrats saying it's doing too little to help civilians in Gaza. Well, the reports keep coming out of Gaza that the massive amounts of food is being stolen by Hamas, and it's not making its way to the citizenry of Gaza anyway. And much like all the resources that have been sent from all over the world, the billions and billions of dollars that have been sent into the Gaza Strip have been spent on building tunnels, not schools, not hospitals, not programs to help the poor and all these other things, but ways to destroy the nation of Israel. And as we see time and again, pictures of access points to the tunnels and the extensive tunnel system inside homes. We've seen caches of weapons stored under beds. And there was even, I think, a video today where one of those housing boxes that has electronic equipment inside, it controls traffic signals and things of that nature, was filled with a rocket launcher. And again, just the end of Israel is the goal of Hamas, and I will say most Palestinians. Now, we do know that this story is of interest for the Ezekiel 38 and 39 scenario. And of course, Israel says they want to expand the circle of peace. We haven't been shy about this, according to Tal Heinrich. But any peace initiative that jeopardizes Israel's security is not something we see as real peace. And addressing the event separately, President Isaac Herzog argued that the bilateral ties with Saudi Arabia would be a setback to Iran backed Hamas. Now, that's important because that's exactly why the Saudis are making these overtures. Remember, we've got two Islamic components who are vying for global rule or domination, if you will, both wanting to establish a caliphate. The Saudis, a Sunni caliphate, and the with the Sunni in charge of Islam internationally, and then the Iranians, Shia, want to see a Shia figure, and believe that it's necessary to bring about a catastrophic event in the world in order for a cataclysmic event in the world in order for the 12th Imam, or the Mahdi, as he's called, to rise to power. And Ahmadinejad, if you remember, the president of Iran a couple of presidents back, saw his goal as kind of a John the Baptist role to bring about the apocalypse so the Mahdi could rise to power. And he saw himself as a forerunner, if you will, to the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, rising to power and ruling over the world. So the Saudis have no love lost for Shia Islam and vice versa. So this is part of the reason, and the article points that out, that there are these overtures that are made towards Israel. But the other thing I think we need to note, and I want to read the headline from the Jewish News from President Herzog. He said, normalization with Saudi Arabia would be a historic game changer. President Isaac Herzog said the deal on the table for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia would be a historic game changer and should be pursued. 2 days ago, I met with the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and heard from him what was officially announced yesterday, that there is an option for normalization with Saudi Arabia. This is a move that could bring about tremendous change, a historic game changer that constitutes a victory over the empire of evil. That would be the Iranians. I very much hope that this possibility is being seriously considered, as the empire of evil sought on October 7th to destroy the chance for normalization. Now, remember, this is a puppet or proxy arm of the Iranians, Hamas, that is. Our struggle in the end is not only a fight against Hamas, it's a wider strategic, global, and historic battle, and we must do everything to integrate into the grand vision of normalization, Herzog said. Jake Sullivan visited both Saudi Arabia and Israel in the past week to promote a deal that would see normalization between the two countries and what would be a mega deal that would include a defense pact between Riyadh and Washington, as well as a path towards Palestinian statehood. The semifinal version of the draft strategic arrangements between the kingdom and the U.S., which are almost being finalized, and what is being worked on between the two sides in the Palestinian issue to find a credible path, were discussed, according to a statement from Sullivan, the meeting between Jake Sullivan and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The normalization would include a two-state solution that meets the aspirations and legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected such a plan last week after Benny Gantz demanded he approve a 6-point strategy that would include normalization with Saudi Arabia. Now, this is interesting because of what we're told in the Ezekiel war scenario. Now, we're told about the nations that are going to invade Israel under ancient names of the descendants of Noah, and historians have helped us understand the geographic regions of the world where these nations settled, nations like Beth Togarmah and Gomer, and other nations that are named Libya and Ethiopia. You'll find in many of your Bibles that's Sudan. The Ethiopia in antiquity is referencing the area directly south of Egypt, which would be Sudan. And the other names that are listed there, Magog and others, they're all in the Table of Nations. The only one that's absent is Rosh, and that is not found in the Table of Nations. There's a bit of a discussion about whether that word is actually a noun or a proper name, and we'll leave that for some other time. But the fact of the matter is, there is a geographic region that is named under the names Sheba and Dedan, and this is the geographic region occupied today by the Arab Gulf states, specifically Saudi Arabia. So, we've already got the coalition working in conjunction with one another on the northern border of Israel. At least three of the nations named there have military personnel and hardware inside of Syria, the very direction the Lord said he's going to draw down these invading armies. And now we've got normalization of the protesting nation, Sheba and Dedan, or again, the Arab Gulf states, making these arrangements with Israel to establish normalized relationships. So everything is falling into place. And back to what I said earlier, it's just ridiculous. It's beyond my understanding why someone would say that modern Israel is not biblical Israel. It's just a political entity, just like any other country, has no covenantal relationship with God, even though God said he's making an everlasting and unconditional covenant with the descendants of Abraham and Isaac through Jacob. And, but apparently everlasting doesn't mean everlasting to some people. But the truth of the matter is, everything is lining up. And man, that ought to be exciting to all of us, because the Lord is going to come before the tribulation begins and remove the bride of Christ, and we will forever be with the Lord when we meet the dead in Christ. And we are living in unbelievable times. Everything the Bible said is related to the last days, even the things that Jesus mentioned in the Olivet Discourse as being likened unto the days of Noah. The earth is filled with violence. The whole earth is corrupt before God. The thoughts and intents of man's heart is only evil continually. We're watching all of these things right before our eyes. So how ridiculous is it to sit on the sidelines or sit on the curb and say, well, this isn't anything to do with the Bible? Well, it has everything to do with the Bible, and we were told what to look for, and we're seeing it right now, including Saudi Arabia trying to normalize a relationship with Israel against the evil empire of the Iranians. It just, the only thing I can say is only God. Only God can say things that far in advance that we're watching unfold today. Now, many of you have been seeing the International Criminal Court seeking to bring charges against Netanyahu. And Israel Hayom is reporting that Biden has no choice. A former official reports that Biden has no choice but to invoke special law against the International Criminal Court. The former Israeli ambassador to Washington, Dr. Michael Oren, said the Biden administration's response to the arrest warrants requested by the ICC prosecutor against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant reflects the Biden administration's unwavering stance in support of Israel. In an exclusive interview with Israel Hayom, Oren praised the U.S. administration for standing firmly beside Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas terrorism in Gaza. He deemed the ICC prosecutor's request for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders outrageous and unacceptable. Oren called on the U.S. to invoke the American Service Members Protection Act of 2001 to shield Israel, protecting Netanyahu, Gallant, and Israeli soldiers from prosecution by the ICC in The Hague. Now, again, I think just, here we've got, much like the United Nothing, you've got the ICC, which has no authority whatsoever. And yet, we've got different movements around the world, things like the World Economic Forum and the ICC and the United Nations, that are reminding us that there is going to be a global empire. And for the first time in human history, it will be a actual global empire. It's going to span the whole of the world. The Antichrist, there's been other world dominating empires in the past, Roman Empire, and obviously the Pax Romana, they held a huge portion of Europe. And but nobody has ever ruled the world. China wasn't under their thumb. Other people groups in different parts of the world were never under the thumb of the Roman Empire, or Alexander the Great, or the Medo-Persian Empire, or even the Babylonians, yet they were deemed to be world dominating empires, and so they were. But none of them geographically ruled the whole world. The Antichrist is going to do exactly that, and we're seeing a movement in that direction, and these types of things being normalized. And I don't know if you saw articles this past week of Klaus Schwab stepping down as the founder, he being the founder of the World Economic Forum, taking kind of a back seat. And, there's talk about different people replacing him. But the truth of the matter is, this is the push right now. Globalism, as we've been hearing about, the New World Order, as that phrase has become commonplace. And all of this under the guise of the redistribution of wealth, equalizing all things between nations. And climate change is one of the mechanisms that's being used as a means to redistribute the wealth. For when a country violates the number or exceeds the carbon footprint that this international body has allowed, they will have to give money to a poor country. And the crazy thing about this, and so many people that are on board with it, people like King Charles and others who are pushing for this, the consequences for exceeding your carbon footprint are not to clean up your act, but rather to give money to somebody else. Now, how is that going to help the climate change issue, which again is being driven and pushed by so many in our world today? Now, Ynet's reporting that Argentina's Milei says victory in war depends not on the number of soldiers, but on forces from heaven. Argentinian President Javier Milei launched a staunch supporter of Israel, known for his affinity to Jewish teachings, has once again showcased his knowledge of Jewish history. In an interview this week with Jonathan Viale, a Jewish journalist in Argentina, Milei talked about the admiration for the biblical character of Moses, the protagonist of the story of the Exodus and the liberator of the Israelites from the enslavement in ancient Egypt. Who is the person I admire most in the history of mankind? Moses. What was the basic characteristic of Moses? Unique humility, Milei said. He further elaborated on the significance of the Exodus, saying Moses was the greatest and the first liberator in history. He stood up to Pharaoh, which is comparable to standing up today to the United States, China, and Russia together. Victory in war depends not on the number of soldiers, but on the forces from heaven. Milei, a known supporter of Israel, visited the country in February. And during his visit, he toured the Western Wall, the Gaza border region, where he expressed shock at the crimes committed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. The Argentine leader voiced a similar sentiment in an interview last month with conservative American pundit Ben Shapiro, stating that the link between freedom and Israel is vital to understanding his position. Now, one of the things I think for us to take note of is that, this is one voice. I mean, we just talked about the fact that 140 of the 197 nations within the UN are basically for establishing a Palestinian state, which is an anti-Israel position because, as I mentioned, the borders for the Palestinian state in the Palestinians' mind, and this would include the everyday Palestinian or most of them, and that is from the river to the sea, from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. They want all of Israel. So taking a pro-Israel position is putting you in the minority, but you know what? That's okay because that's where the church is supposed to be. As a matter of fact, that's where the church lives. And, this just popped in my head as I mentioned that. Stay away from any place that's teaching dominion theology or kingdom now theology. The church is not going to have dominion over 7 seats of power, which allows for Jesus to come back. Jesus is not going to come back because the church made the world ready. We're going to go to a place that Jesus has made ready for us. And it's going to happen in a twinkling of an eye when things are absolutely horrible on the earth, as they were in the days of Noah, where the Lord looks down and just shakes his head at mankind, figuratively speaking, and was sorry that he made them. Now, we're living in such a time, and, whether there's few or many that stand with us, we need to stand with the nation of Israel. And again, we often get accused of just being blind and whatever Israel does is okay with us. Israel has a government full of humans, just like the United States and any other country, and every government makes mistakes. We don't blindly support everything that Israel does. We blindly, if you will, if I can use that phrase, support Israel's right to exist and their right to defend themselves. And they, in an unprovoked attack on October 7th, had things done that were beyond anything I think that any of us could even imagine. And, those who have seen the footage from October 7th and watched the crazed Hamas members and the heinous things that they did to innocent people and, going into different kibbutzim and just slaughtering people. I got an email from a group that's actually touring the country, the United States, of survivors from one of the kibbutz in Israel, that they killed 68 members are inhabitants of this kibbutz. Just people trying to live their life in a simplistic way. And Hamas, because they hate Jews and no other reason, because they hate Jews, went in and slaughtered 68 of these people. And then let me see, who is it that only comes to steal, kill, and destroy? But Jesus came for the other reason, that we might have life and even have it super abundantly. Now, the Associated Press, and kind of switching gears here, moving away from Israel, because part of the last day scenario is wars and rumors of wars, and we're certainly seeing those. And the Associated Press reports that Russia has begun nuclear drills in response to provocative statements. Now, Russia's defense ministry has said it began a round of drills involving tactical nuclear weapons. The exercises were announced by Russian authorities this month in response to remarks by senior Western officials about the possibility of deeper involvement in the war in Ukraine. Those are the provocative statements. It was the first time Russia has publicly announced drills involving tactical nuclear weapons, although its strategic nuclear forces regularly hold exercises. According to the ministry's statement, the first stage of the new drills envisioned practical training and preparation and the use of non strategic nuclear weapons, including nuclear capable Kinzhal and Iskander missiles. The maneuvers are taking place in the Southern Military District, which consists of Russian regions in the south, including on the border with Ukraine, Crimea, illegally annexed from the Ukraine in 2014, and 4 Ukrainian regions that Russia illegally annexed in 2022 and partially occupies. The drills were announced on May 6th, with the Defense Ministry saying in a statement that they would come in response to provocative statements and threats of certain Western officials regarding the Russian Federation. Tactical nuclear weapons include air bombs, warheads for short range missiles, and artillery munitions that are meant for use on a battlefield. They are less powerful than strategic weapons, massive warheads that arm intercontinental ballistic missiles that are intended to obliterate entire cities. The announcement came after French President Emmanuel Macron reiterated that he doesn't exclude sending troops to Ukraine, and UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron and Kiev's forces will be able to use British long range weapons to strike targets inside Russia. The Kremlin branded those comments as dangerous, heightening tension between Russia and NATO. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on May 6th that Macron's statement and other remarks by British and U.S. officials had prompted the nuclear drills, calling the remarks a new round of escalation. You know, I think many people have presented the fact that there's some scary people with their fingers on red buttons and have nuclear codes that could send us instantly into World War III, who have such big egos that they just cannot take uh, anyone standing against them. And we are living in such a world today. And that again underscores the fact that the one with the biggest ego of any being ever created, Satan himself, is behind all of this. After all, he said, I will be like the Most High. I will exalt my throne above his. And we know that's not going to happen because he is a created being, and God's going to lock him up for 1,000 years. And then at the end of that 1,000 years, release him for a short time at the end of the millennium. And then he's going to slam him into the lake of fire where he'll be forever and ever and ever, never to trouble anyone again. He is not God's evil twin. He is a created, finite being who is not omniscient, nor is he omnipotent, all powerful like God. And someday, God is going to do what we have all been hoping he would do with this guy. He's going to shut him down, and we will be with the Lord in the New Jerusalem, by the way, which is kind of an interesting thing that God would name our eternal home the New Jerusalem. Why would he do that if he's done with the Jews and Israel has been replaced by the church? Why would he name our eternal home the New Jerusalem? It just doesn't make sense. Now, again, speaking of leadership in the world today and bizarre decisions and egos and all that, Zero Hedge reports that Joe Biden has drained the entire Northeast gasoline reserve in an effort to lower prices as he trails Trump by double digits in the latest polls. Back in March, when reading the mammoth 1,050-page bill that was meant to avert government shutdown, but was yet another pork-filled free-for-all bonanza, authorizing 1.7 trillion in discretionary spending, we stumbled upon something that was truly shocking. After Biden single-handedly drained half of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve to avoid obliteration for Democrats in the 2022 midterm elections, Congress has snuck in a provision that would sell off and shutter the Northeast gasoline supply reserve, a move that, while perhaps keeps gas prices lower for a day or two, would also leave the entire continental Northeast defenseless to any true environmental catastrophe or shock. We were so dismayed by the inclusion of this particular text, we wondered if it hadn't been put there solely for the benefit of America's enemies. And that's right. That's the age in which we live, that the man with the most powerful position in the world could be under suspicion of working on behalf of our enemies. We are living in perilous times for sure. The article goes on to say, we were wrong earlier today, just 2 months after the bill was signed by Biden into law. The panicking administration announced that it would sell the nearly 1 million barrels of gasoline in the U.S. managed stockpile in the northeastern states, the Department of Energy said, effectively closing the reserve. The department created the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve in 2014 after the Superstorm Sandy left motorists scrambling for fuel. But according to some mega brains hoping to justify the dumping of gas so its price drops for a few weeks ahead of the summer and avoid even more anger aimed at the president, storing refined fuel is considered costlier than storing crude oil, so closing the reserve was included in U.S. funding legislation signed by the president in March. And Biden, or bids rather, to buy the gasoline located at the two NGSR storage sites in Port Reading, New Jersey, and South Portland, Maine, are due on May 28th, and the Treasury Department's general funds gets proceeds from the sale. And incidentally, the proceeds from the reserve liquidation, which will amount to roughly 125 million gross, is roughly how much the government spends every 15 minutes. They spend $125 million every 15 minutes. That's just beyond bizarre. But again, trying to control the outcome of an election, drive prices down before summer, trying to ease the animosity towards the current president and all the ridiculous things that our country has experienced. And, I think one of the things that, in remembering that there is coming a strong delusion to the world that they will believe the lie I believe that Paul was talking about there in 2 Thessalonians is the lie that the Antichrist is God, or the first beast of Revelation 13 is God. But again, these things have to have developed prior to the tribulation period because people are going to have to buy into him right away, because that's what opens the tribulation period. A rider on the white horse in Revelation 6:2 rides onto the world scene with a covenant in hand, and the whole world will go after him, Revelation 13 confirms. So, just looking at some of these things that have been said by people who have a microphone and huge audiences. The one guy, Bill Maher, I don't know what his deal is, if he's high or what, but he said, the president has done an admirable job in this first 3 years. Well, that depends on what you think his goal was, I suppose. But again, just, watching the days in which we live, it's just beyond bizarre to sell off the stockpile of gas under the banner that it's cheaper to store crude oil. Again, it's just deflection of the reality of trying to influence an election. Now, another story that I believe should say, point our minds to what's going to happen during the tribulation, something that we won't be here for, by the way, comes from the Associated Press, where we're told a Michigan farm worker was diagnosed with bird flu, becoming the second U.S. case tied to dairy cows. A Michigan dairy worker has been diagnosed with bird flu. This is the second case, and the male worker had been in contact with cows at a farm with infected animals. He experienced mild eye symptoms and has recovered, U.S. and Michigan health officials said in announcing the case on Wednesday. And a nasal swab from the person tested negative for the virus, but an eye swab tested Tuesday was positive for the bird flu, indicating an eye infection, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention officials said. The worker developed a gritty feeling in his eye earlier this month, but it was a very mild case, said Dr. Natasha Bagdasarian, Michigan's chief medical executive. He was not treated uh, with a medication specific to that, advised for treating the bird flu. She said, the risk to the public remains low, but farm workers exposed to infected animals that are at a higher risk, health officials said. Now, one thing we do know is that during the tribulation under the rider of the third horse, we're going to see that there's an interaction between the beasts of the earth and we're going to see these catastrophic events, health related events. I believe take place, or I should say, they're going to see. We're not going to see those things. Catastrophic health related events take place. That are anytime there's a famine, you've always got issues related to mass numbers of deaths and cholera spreading and other diseases. And now here we've got, the reality we've been told in time past, the bird flu cannot transfer to humans and things of that nature. And now yet here we have the second verified case. And I wanted to include this story just to point our minds to what's going to be happening during the tribulation. There's going to be a massive famine. And as I mentioned a moment ago, famine always has companions, and those companions are death and disease. And, people are going to make decisions that they would not normally make as far as their exposure to infected animals and things of that nature during the tribulation period because of starvation. You'll do things you wouldn't normally do when food is scarce and eat things you wouldn't normally eat. So, again, not saying that this is, you know, uh, part of that in the sense that it's going to lead to that. But we do know it's coming. We do know that this is what's going to happen in our world, that there's going to be a massive famine to the degree and the inflation that goes with that to the degree that a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley are going to cost a day's pay, a whole denarius. And that's just enough food for one person. And what are you going to do for your family during this time? And yet, interestingly, we read twice in the book of Revelation, once in Revelation 6, I think it's verse 9, where basically people shake their fist at the Lord. And they know that it's the God of heaven, him who sits on the throne, and the Lamb who are pouring out their wrath, yet they will not repent. And this is the kind of society that we live in today. It doesn't matter what the facts are, it doesn't matter what the truth is. Anything but God is what we will follow and bow to. Now, here's another story along those same lines, and sorry if some of this language is a bit rough, but not foul language, by the way. ABC News reports that STIs, sexually transmitted infections, including syphilis, gonorrhea, are increasing globally, according to the World Health Organization. The number of sexually transmitted diseases around the world is increasing and is a major concern for health officials. Now, the sexual revolution of the 60s has now just become normal. You have a right to do whatever you want and to have whatever sexual partner you choose, same sex, bisexual, whatever it is you want to do. You have a right to do that in today's world. And any type of sexual activity is permissible in the eyes of most people today. And according to this published report from Tuesday and the World Health Organization, 4 curable STIs, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and trichomoniasis, are responsible for more than 1 million infections daily. Did you get that? 1 million people are being affected every day between the ages of 15 and 49. How are they transmitted? Sex. And these cases, syphilis in particular, the article says has been rising rapidly. And the number of new syphilis cases among adults between ages 15 and 49 increased from 7.1 million in 2020 to 8 million in 2022, according to the report. And there have also been increases in the rate of congenital syphilis, which occurs when a baby is born with the infection after the mother passed it on during pregnancy. And between 2020 and 2022, the rate per 100,000 live births per year rose from 425 to 523. And the global trends mirrored those seen in the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report released a report earlier this year that found the total number of syphilis cases increased more than 17% between 2021 and 2022. Now, remember, the data takes time to dissect and accumulate. So that's the most recent numbers in 2021 to 2022. It's the greatest number of cases reported since 1950. And the report also found cases of antibiotic resistant gonorrhea are increasing, which was labeled another, quote, concern. As of 2023, 9 countries reported elevated levels from 5% up to 40% of resistance to ceftriaxone, which is considered the last line treatment for gonorrhea. And data points to a lack of screening for the rise of STIs, as well as other issues, including a lack of access to care. Oh, it couldn't be promiscuity, has to be a lack of access to care. Additionally, disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic likely delayed screening from or for many. And again, deflection, these are sexually transmitted diseases. So it's spread because of sex. It's spread because of people who are having casual sex, as the term goes. And God knows what He's doing when He limited sexual activity, permissible sexual activity between married couples, married male-female couples only. Now, interesting. The article goes on to say that while the numbers are pretty much across the board, and uh, HIV numbers actually fell from 1.3 million to 1.5 in 2022. The World Health Organization, and listen to this, notes that certain populations, men who have sex with men, people who inject drugs, sex workers, and transgender people, and those currently in prisons and other closed settings, continue to be disproportionately affected by HIV. Now, some of you who've been around for a while, like me, remember that HIV was first called GRIDS, gay-related immune deficiency syndrome. But that was offensive to the homosexual community, so they changed the name to HIV, or AIDS, I should say, acquired immune deficiency syndrome instead of gay-related immune deficiency syndrome, even though the very first case was traced back to a homosexual individual that came from Africa, and they've been able to track the case. So, but again, because that's not politically correct, we can't be saying those kind of things. So delusion is better than facts in the days in which we now live. Now, space.com says a comet approaching Earth could become brighter than the stars this fall. And this is just an interesting story, I think, for our own reading pleasure, so to speak, but it points our mind to the fact that I believe that wormwood is actually a comet in the book of Revelation, because it breaks up, poisons a third of the world's drinking supply, makes it radioactive, I believe, and many people die because of drinking radioactive water. Now, remember, asteroid is comprised mostly of iron, where comets are comprised of gas and ice, and therefore they would melt coming into our atmosphere, and it would be acid rain like this world has never seen. Again, poisoning a third of the world's freshwater drinking supply, as the book of Revelation says. So, and the article is interesting because it says, in the year where we have already been treated to the great North American solar eclipse in April, and one of the greatest displays of northern lights in the past 500 years in May, what other amazing celestial attractions might 2024 have in store for us? And over the last couple of years, 2 comets have made headlines in the mainstream media. In early February 2023, Comet C 2022 E3, informally called the Great Green Comet, passed near Earth. And then during the past month, Comet 12P, Pons Brooks, drew attention because of the propensity for experiencing sudden flare-ups in brightness and appearing to spout gaseous appendages resembling horns, thus giving rise to the moniker the Devil's Comet. Now, there will be signs in the heavens. And remember that what's going to happen during the tribulation is going to cause people to have heart attacks because they're so afraid. Men's hearts failing them from fear because of the things that are coming upon the earth, is how it's put. And by the end of this summer, we may have a good idea to whether we'll have a bright and easy to see naked eye comet gracing our early autumn evening sky. And the comet in question is C 2023 A3, discovered by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, in South Africa on February 22nd, 2023. ATLAS is a robotic early warning system developed specifically for detecting near Earth asteroids a few weeks to just days before they might impact the Earth. Originally thought to be an asteroid, it was later determined that the same object was photographed 6 weeks earlier by the Purple Mountain Observatory east of Nanjing, China, and has been determined to actually be an incoming comet. And when the comet was first sighted, it was far out beyond the orbit of Jupiter, 680 million miles from the sun. But on September 27th of this year, uh, Atlas will be making its closest approach to the sun, coming within 36 million miles. Now, October 12th is when supposedly, if things continue as they've calculated, it will be visible to the naked eye. So keep an eye on the skies this coming October. But I wanted to mention this just to draw our minds to the fact that there is coming a time where the events happening in the atmosphere and on the earth are going to be so frightening that people will die of heart attacks, as I mentioned a moment ago. And I think, it's important for us to keep these things in mind. And here you've got Atlas that's watching for asteroids. And as the description of Atlas said, sometimes they only spot them days in advance. And the number of things that have just popped up that we've been watching this past year, the Northern Lights. I don't know if you've seen some of the pictures of the Aurora Borealis, even down into the great Northwest of the United States. And they've just been stunning. And this is because of the sun's solar cycle and the coronal mass ejections that we've been watching, and some of these other things that are just paired with it kind of take our eyes up off the ground and cause them to look up. Well, I think we need to keep looking up because our redemption is nigh. The Lord is going to come and get us, and He is going to take us to where He is, that we may be where He is also. And at that point in time, the Bible says clearly we will forever be with the Lord. We'll be with Him here when He rules and reigns in righteousness for 1,000 years on the earth. We'll return with Him, Revelation 19:11-16, and we'll come back with Him on white horses, just like He is riding at that point in time. And he's clothed with a robe dipped in blood, Revelation 19 says. And He comes back as a God of war. He comes back to make war on the enemies of Israel and thus His enemies. He is still the Holy One of Israel. And so be careful about listening to teaching that modern Israel is not biblical Israel and all these other things, as we warned earlier. It's beyond ridiculous, and therefore it's satanically inspired to deny Israel's role in God's unchanging plan for them as a nation. And even though they have rejected the Messiah nationally, what has not been fulfilled are the things that God said is going to happen is Revelation 12:10, or I'm sorry, Zechariah 12:10. They're going to look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. In other words, at that point in time, Romans chapter 11 is going to be fulfilled. 2/3 of the Jews will die during the tribulation, which is a tragedy, but they will die in unbelief. But those who will look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn as one mourns for an only son will be supernaturally protected throughout the whole of the tribulation, and they will see Jesus as the Mashiach ben David, the Holy One of Israel, finally, after all these years. Well, that's it for this week, and please, again, pray for Pastor Steve Yohn, a great author. The books that he and Amir wrote, the fiction books, I have enjoyed them greatly, and also pray for little Elena. As I said at the top of the hour, she's just one of the sweetest young women, and she is a witnessing machine. I mean, she tells everybody about the Lord. She is one of the most vocal members of our street witnessing team that goes out to Huntington Beach and other places and preaches the gospel and shares the love of Christ. And she is always right there on the front lines, and she needs prayer. So pray for Elena, pray for Steve Young. And that's it for this week. And again, thank you for joining us. And by the way, I don't often say this, but I said this a couple of weeks ago. Please share this video, because I said some things regarding the current administration and so many things about Israel. I don't know what Google does. Facebook shadow bans doesn't allow people to see your video, but when you see something happen, and the same thing, I don't know if any of you know who Mike Winger is, dear brother, but he had the same thing happen recently because of some of the things that he had mentioned about Joel Osteen and Benny Hinn, where your page basically isn't seen by anybody, and the number of new viewers and subscribers has dropped, like 75%. So I think it's important to get this information out. So if you would help us out a little bit, share these videos, and get the word out to others. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Please keep these two prayer requests on your prayer list. Give them to your church if your church has a prayer chain. And let's get people praying because God answers prayer. Amen. Well, that's it for me this week. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week. Otherwise, what we do know for sure is we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless.